The ballroom of the Eco Grand Hotel shimmered beneath hundreds of crystal chandeliers, their golden light reflecting off polished marble floors and towering glass walls that overlooked the sparkling Lagos skyline. Politicians, celebrities, business moguls, and foreign investors filled the room, their expensive suits and elegant gowns creating a sea of luxury. Soft classical music floated through the air, while waiters moved gracefully between guests carrying trays of champagne and gourmet delicacies. Everyone was waiting for one person, Ada Okafor. As the announcer's voice echoed through the hall, every head turned toward the grand entrance. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and CEO of AO Global Holdings, Africa's youngest self-made billionaire, Miss Ada Okafor. The doors slowly opened. Ada stepped inside wearing a simple but breathtaking emerald green evening gown that perfectly complemented her dark skin. Standing 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, defined arms, and the toned physique of someone who spent years lifting weights and practicing martial arts, she commanded attention the moment she entered. Her beauty was undeniable. Her confidence was unmistakable. Her presence silenced the room. Guests immediately stood to applaud. Cameras flashed endlessly. Journalists hurried forward to capture the perfect photograph. Some admired her success. Others envied her wealth. Many of the men simply stared. She's even more beautiful in person. I heard she's worth over $5 billion. Look at those muscles. I'd marry her tomorrow. Ada smiled politely as she greeted people, but inside, she felt completely empty. She had heard those comments for years. Beautiful, rich, powerful, strong. No one ever called her kind. No one ever asked whether she was happy. To most people, she wasn't a woman. She was a prize, a trophy, a fortune waiting to be claimed. She walked through the crowd with practiced elegance, shaking hands and exchanging brief conversations with guests. Years of attending events like this had taught her how to smile even when she wanted to leave. Miss Okafor, your latest logistics expansion into East Africa is incredible, one investor said. Congratulations on becoming the first Nigerian woman to acquire a European shipping company, another added. Your company's shares rose again this morning. You're an inspiration. Ada thanked each person politely. What no one knew was that she hadn't slept well in weeks. The pressure of running one of Africa's largest business empires never truly disappeared. Yet work wasn't what kept her awake at night. It was loneliness. She glanced across the ballroom and spotted Richard Lawson talking confidently with several influential businessmen. Richard was handsome, well-dressed, and charming. Coming from one of Nigeria's wealthiest families, he fit perfectly into high society. For nearly a year, everyone believed they were the perfect couple. Magazine covers called them Africa's royal pair. Social media celebrated them. Even Ada had believed she had finally found someone who loved her, or at least she wanted to believe it. Richard noticed her looking and walked over with his trademark confident smile. There you are, he said, gently taking her hand. Everyone's been asking about you. Ada smiled faintly. I had to greet the guests. Richard leaned closer. You look incredible tonight. Thank you. You always do. To everyone watching, they looked deeply in love. But Ada couldn't ignore the strange feeling growing inside her. Something had changed in Richard over the past few months. Whenever they spent time together, conversations always drifted toward business. He wanted access to company meetings. He wanted to know about investments. He wanted details about company shares. Whenever Ada suggested spending quiet time together away from work, he somehow managed to bring the conversation back to money. She had noticed. She simply didn't want to admit what it might mean. The evening continued with speeches celebrating successful entrepreneurs whose charitable foundations had transformed communities across Nigeria. Finally, the master of ceremonies invited Ada onto the stage. The audience erupted into applause once more. Ada stepped up to the microphone. Thank you all for being here tonight, she began. I've always believed that success means nothing if it doesn't improve someone else's life. That's why AO Global Holdings has committed another $100 million toward scholarships, healthcare, and youth employment across Africa. The applause was thunderous. Some guests even stood. Ada smiled. Helping people had always brought her more joy than making money. As she prepared to leave the stage, the lights suddenly dimmed. Soft violin music filled the ballroom. Ada frowned slightly. This wasn't part of the program. Richard stepped onto the stage carrying a small velvet box. The crowd gasped. Someone whispered excitedly, "He's proposing." Within seconds, dozens of phones were pointed toward the stage. Television cameras zoomed in. Richard took Ada's hands. "Ada!" His voice echoed through the ballroom. "The day I met you, I knew you were extraordinary." Guests smiled. Some women wiped away tears. "You are beautiful. You are intelligent. You inspire millions. And I cannot imagine spending my life without you." Richard slowly lowered himself onto one knee. The ballroom exploded with applause. He opened the velvet box. Inside was a massive diamond ring that sparkled beneath the lights. "Ada Okafor, will you marry me?" The audience erupted. "Say yes. Congratulations. What a beautiful couple." Hundreds of people began recording. Ada stared silently at Richard. She should have felt overwhelmed with joy. Instead, her heart felt strangely heavy. She looked into his eyes, searching for something. Anything. A glimpse of genuine love. Before she could answer, one of the event organizers quietly approached the stage. "Miss Okafor," he whispered, "the chairman from South Africa is asking for you backstage before your answer. He says it's urgent." Ada apologized briefly and walked behind the curtains. Richard smiled confidently. He wasn't worried. He already knew what her answer would be. As Ada made her way through the quiet hallway behind the ballroom, she realized she had forgotten her phone near one of the private lounges. Turning back, she approached the room. The door wasn't fully closed. She reached for the handle, then froze. Richard's voice came from inside. "You should have seen their faces," he laughed. Another man chuckled. "So she'll say yes?" Richard laughed again. "Of course she will. Do you actually love her?" There was a brief silence. Then Richard answered. "Love." He burst into laughter. "You don't marry $5 billion because of love." The men inside laughed loudly. Richard continued. "Once we're married, combining our businesses will make me the richest man in West Africa. And if she refuses to give you control?" Richard scoffed. "She trusts me too much. Besides, she'll be busy running the company. I'll quietly take care of the investments. In 5 years, everything she owns will practically be mine." Another friend laughed. "So all those romantic vacations?" Richard shrugged. "Necessary investment. And honestly," he smirked, "I've dated prettier women." Ada's heart stopped. The hallway suddenly felt colder. Every word hit her like a hammer. The vacations, the gifts, the promises, the late-night conversations. Every "I love you," every embrace, every kiss. Nothing had been real. She slowly stepped backward before anyone inside noticed her. Her breathing became uneven. Tears formed in her eyes, not because Richard had rejected her, but because he had confirmed her greatest fear. No one wanted Ada. They wanted her money. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Images from the past flooded her mind. Her first boyfriend asking for expensive cars. Another demanding company shares. One secretly recording business meetings. Another disappearing after she refused to finance his failed business. Every relationship had followed the same painful pattern. Different faces. Same ending. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. "No more," she whispered. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her head, and walked back toward the stage. The audience immediately erupted into applause again. Richard smiled confidently from one knee. He had no idea what she had heard. Ada walked slowly toward him. The ballroom fell silent. Richard extended the ring. "So, is that a yes?" Ada looked down at him, then looked across the thousands of faces watching expectantly. She took a deep breath. "I have an answer." The room became completely silent. Richard smiled. Ada's voice remained calm. My answer is no. The silence was deafening. Richard's smile disappeared instantly. Confused murmurs spread through the audience. What? Did she just say no? Ada stepped back. I will not marry a man who loves my bank account more than he loves me. Richard's face turned pale. What are you talking about? I heard everything. His confidence vanished. Ada, you called me an investment. You told your friends that marrying me was your shortcut to becoming richer. Richard tried to grab her hand. You misunderstood. No. Ada pulled away. I finally understood. Television cameras captured every second. The ballroom buzzed with whispers. Richard desperately lowered his voice. Please, not here. You should have thought about that before lying to me. She removed the engagement ring he had given her months earlier and placed it in his trembling hand. Our relationship ends tonight. Without another word, Ada walked off the stage. The crowd instinctively parted to make way for her. No one spoke. Only the sound of her heels echoed through the silent ballroom. Outside, the cool Lagos night air greeted her. She climbed into the back seat of her waiting car. The driver looked into the rearview mirror. Home, ma'am? Ada stared out the window at the glittering city lights. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry. Not because she had lost Richard, but because she realized she had never truly had him. As the luxury car disappeared into the night, television stations across Nigeria interrupted their regular programming. Breaking news. Africa's youngest billionaire calls off her engagement during live charity gala. By sunrise, the entire country would be talking about Ada Okafor. But no one knew the promise she silently made to herself as tears rolled down her face. If love exists, I'll find it. Even if I have to leave this life behind to do it. The headlines refused to disappear. For 3 straight days, every television station, newspaper, blog, and social media platform carried the same story. Billionaire Ada Okafor rejects fiancé during live proposal. What really happened at the charity gala? Africa's richest bachelor left humiliated. Some people praised Ada for standing up for herself. Others criticized her for embarrassing Richard in public. Countless rumors spread online. Some claimed she had another man. Others insisted she had become arrogant because of her wealth. Only Ada knew the truth. She had finally walked away from a lie. On the top floor of AO Global Holdings' magnificent headquarters in Victoria Island, Lagos, Ada stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Hundreds of vehicles crawled through the busy streets below. Thousands of people hurried to work. Life went on. Yet for the first time in years, Ada felt trapped inside her own success. A gentle knock came at the office door. Come in. Chioma Nwosu, her loyal personal assistant and closest friend, walked inside carrying a tablet. You have meetings with the Minister of Transport at 10, investors from Dubai at noon, and the board meeting begins by 2. Ada didn't turn around. Cancel everything. Chioma blinked. Everything. Everything. Ada, the investors flew in yesterday. They'll survive. Chioma quietly placed the tablet on the desk. You haven't slept again. Ada sighed. I keep asking myself the same question. What question? What is wrong with me? Chioma frowned. There is absolutely nothing wrong with you. Ada finally turned around. Then why has every man I've ever loved seen me as a business opportunity? Chioma walked closer. Because you keep meeting men who are attracted to your money instead of your heart. Ada laughed bitterly. How am I supposed to know the difference? Neither woman spoke for a moment. The silence filled the luxurious office. Finally, Ada spoke again. I've spent years building this empire. She looked around the massive office. Designer furniture, rare artwork, awards lining the shelves, certificates, photographs with presidents and world leaders. I have everything money can buy. She paused. But I don't have the one thing money can't. Love, Chioma whispered. Ada nodded. I want someone who sees me before they see my bank account. Chioma smiled gently. What are you thinking? Ada turned toward the window again. I'm leaving. Chioma's eyes widened. Leaving where? This life. What do you mean? I'm disappearing. Chioma stared at her in disbelief. You own the biggest logistics company in West Africa. I know. You're one of the most recognized women on the continent. I know. People will notice if you disappear. Ada smiled. Only if Ada Okafor disappears. Chioma folded her arms. I don't like that smile. Ada walked toward her desk and picked up a brochure from one of the company's smaller subsidiaries. It advertised motorcycle delivery services. She placed it in front of Chioma. I want to become one of them. Chioma looked at the brochure, then back at Ada. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You've never even delivered a package. I know how to ride motorcycles. That's not the point. I'm tired of being treated differently. Ada. I want strangers to see an ordinary woman. Chioma sighed deeply. And if someone falls in love with that woman, I'll know it's real. 2 weeks later, one by one, the pieces of Ada's old life disappeared. The luxury Rolls-Royce stayed in the garage. Her private jet remained grounded. Designer handbags were packed into storage. Diamond jewelry was locked away. Even her famous wardrobe of expensive suits and dresses disappeared. Standing before a mirror inside a small apartment Chioma had secretly rented on the mainland, Ada barely recognized herself. Gone was the glamorous billionaire whose face appeared on magazine covers. Instead, she saw a simple young woman wearing faded blue jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and sturdy black boots. Her long, elegant hairstyle had been trimmed into a practical shoulder-length cut that could fit comfortably beneath a helmet. She removed the last expensive watch from her wrist. No jewelry, Chioma reminded her. Ada smiled. It feels strange. It'll feel even stranger sleeping here. Ada looked around the apartment. It was tiny. A small living room, a narrow kitchen, one bedroom. An old ceiling fan turned lazily above them. The walls needed fresh paint. Outside, children laughed while playing football in the dusty street. For the first time in years, she smiled genuinely. It feels peaceful. Chioma laughed. That's because nobody here knows you're richer than half the people in this city combined. Ada nodded. And I'd like to keep it that way. The next morning, Ada reported to Swift Drop Delivery Services. The modest office buzzed with activity. Delivery riders collected parcels. Dispatchers answered phones. Motorcycles lined the parking area. The manager, Mr. Bello, looked over Ada's application. You've ridden motorcycles before? Yes, sir. You understand Lagos traffic isn't easy. I'll manage. He glanced at her muscular arms. You certainly look strong enough. Some riders nearby whispered among themselves. She's built like a bodybuilder. I wouldn't argue with her. I bet she can lift the motorcycle. Ada pretended not to hear. Mr. Bello stood. All right. He handed her a sky-blue delivery jacket. Welcome to the team. She accepted it with both hands. Thank you, sir. Walking into the changing room, Ada slowly zipped up the jacket. She looked into the mirror. For the first time in her adult life, nobody expected her to run a billion-dollar company. She was simply rider number 47. Reality arrived much faster than she expected. Her first delivery involved carrying office supplies across Lagos during rush hour. The blazing afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Sweat soaked her uniform. Cars refused to give way. Commercial buses cut across lanes without warning. Impatient drivers honked constantly. By lunchtime, Ada's shoulders ached. My goodness, she muttered. So this is what delivery riders endure every day. She stopped beside a roadside food vendor. 1 plate of jollof rice, please. The elderly woman serving food smiled warmly. Long morning, Ada laughed. You have no idea. The woman handed over the food. God will strengthen you, my daughter. Ada thanked her and sat on a small wooden bench. No one recognized her. Nobody stared. Nobody asked for business advice. Nobody requested investments. She was invisible, and strangely, she loved it. The following days became even more challenging. Some customers treated delivery workers with respect. Others treated them terribly. One wealthy customer opened his mansion gate, glanced at Ada, and frowned. "What took you so long?" "There was heavy traffic, sir." "I don't care." He snatched the package from her hands. "You delivery people always have excuses." The gate slammed shut. Ada stood quietly. Months earlier, she had probably unknowingly employed people exactly like him. Now she understood how ordinary workers were often treated. Another afternoon, she climbed 4 flights of stairs carrying heavy electronics. When she reached the apartment, the customer refused to answer the door for nearly 15 minutes. She simply waited patiently. By evening, exhaustion filled every muscle in her body. Yet she couldn't stop smiling. She was earning every naira honestly. Not as a billionaire. As Ada Obi. Not everyone was kind. Several young men laughed as she parked outside a shopping complex. "See her muscles. Are you sure you're not a wrestler? Who would marry a woman stronger than her husband?" The group burst into laughter. Ada lowered her eyes and walked away without responding. Inside, the words stung. She had heard them since university. Too muscular. Too intimidating. Too strong. She had spent years building her body because fitness made her feel confident. Yet many people treated her strength as though it made her less of a woman. That evening, while removing her helmet after work, she stared at herself in the mirror. For a brief moment, doubt returned. Maybe Richard wasn't the only man who saw her differently. Maybe every man would. Then she shook her head. "No, the right man won't be afraid. He'll respect me." Days turned into weeks. Ada slowly became one of the best riders at Swiftdrop. She memorized Lego streets, learned shortcuts, made friends with fellow riders. She laughed with them during lunch breaks, shared roadside meals, listened to stories about rent, family struggles, dreams, and hope. For the first time in years, conversations weren't about stock prices or billion-dollar contracts. They were about life, real life. One Friday afternoon, Mr. Bello handed her another package. "Last delivery for today." She smiled. "Where to?" He checked the address. "Adjagunal Road." She secured the parcel inside the delivery box behind her motorcycle. Dark clouds gathered overhead. Within minutes, thunder rolled across the sky. Rain began falling. First it was gentle. Then it became a torrential downpour. Visibility dropped. Traffic slowed to a crawl. Ada carefully navigated the slippery roads. Halfway to her destination, the motorcycle made a strange, sputtering sound. She frowned. "Not now." The engine coughed once, twice, then died completely. The motorcycle rolled silently to the roadside. Ada tried restarting it. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Rain poured harder. Water soaked her jacket within seconds. She pushed the motorcycle beneath the small shelter of a tree and examined the engine. "I wish I knew something about mechanics," she murmured. She looked up. Just across the road stood a modest workshop with a faded sign hanging above its entrance. "Ease Motorcycle Repairs." The sound of metal striking metal echoed from inside. Several motorcycles stood outside waiting to be repaired. Ada took a deep breath, gripped the handlebars, and began pushing the heavy motorcycle through the rain toward the workshop. She had no idea that the man working inside that small garage would soon change the course of her life forever. And somewhere else in Lagos, another pair of eyes had begun searching for her. Richard Lawson wasn't ready to let her go. Not after losing the fortune he believed should have been his. The hunt for Ada Okafor had quietly begun. Rain pounded the rusty zinc roofs lining the narrow street, turning the dusty road into a muddy stream. Thunder rumbled overhead while impatient drivers splashed dirty water across the roadside as they sped past. Ada tightened her grip on the handlebars of the stalled delivery motorcycle and pushed with all her strength. The motorcycle was heavier than it looked. Her uniform clung to her body, soaked from the relentless rain. Water dripped from the edge of her helmet and ran down her face, but she refused to complain. She had chosen this life. Every difficult moment reminded her why she had left her mansion behind. Finally, she reached the workshop. A faded wooden sign hung above the entrance. Ease Motorcycle Repairs. It wasn't a fancy place. The walls were cracked. Old motorcycle parts were neatly stacked in one corner. Several worn-out tires leaned against the wall. The smell of engine oil mixed with the scent of wet earth filled the air. Inside, a man wearing blue overalls knelt beside a motorcycle, tightening a bolt with practiced hands. He looked up when he heard the sound of the motorcycle being pushed inside. For a brief second, his eyes widened. Not because Ada was beautiful, not because she was muscular, but because she was struggling alone in the heavy rain. Without saying a word, he immediately put down his tools. "Hold on," he called. He hurried over and grabbed the front handlebars. "Let's get it inside before the rain ruins the engine." Together they pushed the motorcycle into the shelter of the workshop. Ada pulled off her helmet, shaking droplets of water from her hair. "Thank you," she said, slightly out of breath. The mechanic smiled warmly. "No problem." His voice was calm and reassuring. "I'm David." "Ada." He nodded politely. "What seems to be the problem?" It suddenly lost power. David crouched beside the motorcycle and examined the engine. "When did it happen?" "About 5 minutes ago." "Were there any strange sounds?" "It sputtered a few times before stopping." David nodded thoughtfully. "Let's take a look." Ada watched quietly as he worked. His movements were smooth and confident. There was no rush, no frustration, just years of experience speaking through his hands. After a few minutes, David looked up. "The spark plug is damaged." "Is it serious?" He smiled. "Not really. You were lucky it happened close to my workshop." Ada laughed softly. "I was beginning to think today couldn't get any worse." David chuckled. "I've learned something after years of fixing motorcycles." "What's that?" "Machines always choose the worst possible time to break down." Ada couldn't help laughing. It was such a simple joke. Yet it made her smile more genuinely than any expensive dinner Richard had ever taken her to. David disappeared into a storage room and returned carrying a replacement spark plug. "It won't take long." As he worked, Ada noticed the workshop more carefully. Everything had a place. Every tool was clean despite years of use. Nothing was luxurious, but everything reflected discipline. Someone took pride in this little business. Suddenly, a cheerful voice echoed from behind the workshop. "Daddy!" A little girl ran inside wearing a yellow raincoat much too big for her tiny body. She couldn't have been older than 7. The moment she reached David, she wrapped her arms tightly around him. "I missed you." David laughed and lifted her effortlessly. "I only saw you this morning." "That's too long." Ada smiled without realizing it. David noticed. "This is my daughter, Sophia." Sophia waved excitedly. "Hello." "Hello," Ada replied warmly. David gently set his daughter down. "Sophia, go inside and finish your homework." "I already finished." "So quickly." "I wanted to surprise Grandma." David smiled proudly. "That's my smart girl." Sophia suddenly looked at Ada. "Why are you so wet?" Ada laughed. "The rain won." Sophia giggled. "You should tell Daddy to fix the rain too." David burst into laughter. "If I could repair the weather, we'd be billionaires." The three of them laughed together. For reasons Ada couldn't explain, the workshop suddenly felt less like a repair shop and more like a home. A few moments later, an elderly woman stepped out from a small room behind the workshop carrying 3 cups. "David, I made tea." She stopped when she noticed Ada. "Oh, we have a visitor." David quickly introduced them. "Mama, this is Ada. Her motorcycle broke down." The elderly woman smiled kindly. "Then she's not leaving here soaked." She handed 1 cup to Ada. "Drink this before you catch a cold." Ada hesitated. "Oh, I couldn't possibly." "Nonsense. It's only tea." Ada accepted it. "Thank you very much." The warm cup felt comforting in her cold hands. She took a sip. It wasn't expensive tea served in crystal cups like she was used to, yet somehow tasted better. Mrs. Grace watched her closely. "You work as a delivery rider?" "Yes." "That can't be easy." Ada smiled. It's honest work. Mrs. Grace nodded approvingly. That's something to be proud of. Those simple words touched Ada deeply. No one had praised her work in weeks. Not because she was a billionaire, but because she was trying. David finally stood up. There. The motorcycle should start now. Ada watched him wipe his hands with an old cloth. So soon. It was a simple repair. She inserted the key. The engine started immediately. Her face lit up. It works. David grinned. I told you. Ada reached into her pocket and pulled out several folded bills. Thank you. How much? David named a modest amount. Ada blinked. That's all. He nodded. That's the normal price. She looked at the money in her hand. Instinctively, she offered him nearly 5 times the amount. Please. For your kindness. David looked at the money, then slowly pushed it back toward her. No. Ada frowned. You repaired it in the rain. Yes. You gave me tea. My mother gave you tea. You fixed it immediately. That's my job. I insist. David smiled politely. And I refuse. Ada stared at him in surprise. He continued calmly. You work hard for your money. You shouldn't pay more than the repair costs. The words struck her like lightning. She had spent years surrounded by people trying to take as much money from her as possible. Yet here stood a man refusing extra payment. Not because he didn't need it. The workshop clearly wasn't making a fortune. But because it wasn't right. For the first time in years, someone treated her wallet with honesty. She slowly placed the extra money back into her pocket. Thank you. David shrugged. Safe journey. Before Ada could leave, Sophia tugged gently on her sleeve. Can you help me? Ada looked down. Of course. My bicycle chain came off. She pointed toward a tiny pink bicycle leaning against the wall. David smiled apologetically. I've been meaning to fix it. I've just been busy. Ada crouched beside the bicycle. Years earlier, during one of her fitness adventures across Europe, she had learned basic bicycle repairs. Within minutes, she repositioned the chain and tightened it properly. There. Sophia's eyes widened. You fixed it. She immediately climbed onto the bicycle and rode around the workshop laughing happily. It works. It works. David looked genuinely impressed. I didn't know delivery riders fixed bicycles too. Ada smiled mischievously. I know a little about many things. Sophia suddenly parked the bicycle and ran toward Ada. Before Ada realized what was happening, the little girl threw her arms around her. Thank you. Ada froze. She couldn't remember the last time someone hugged her with such innocent affection. No expectations. No hidden motives. Just gratitude. Slowly, she hugged Sophia back. You are welcome. Mrs. Grace quietly watched the scene. A gentle smile spread across her face. There are some people, she said softly, who walk into your life like they've been sent for a reason. David laughed lightly. Mama has started again. Mrs. Grace ignored him. Instead, she looked at Ada. You're always welcome here. Those words warmed Ada's heart. She put her helmet back on. Thank you, all of you. David waved. Ride carefully. Sophia shouted excitedly. Come back soon. Ada smiled beneath her helmet. I will. She rode away slowly, disappearing into the now gentle rain. As she reached the end of the street, she glanced once in her mirror. David was still standing outside the workshop, watching to make sure she reached the road safely. Only after she disappeared into traffic did he return inside. That evening, Ada sat alone in her tiny apartment eating instant noodles from a simple bowl. It was a far cry from the gourmet meals prepared by private chefs in her mansion. Yet she couldn't stop smiling. She replayed the afternoon in her mind. David's kindness, Mrs. Grace's warm tea, Sophia's joyful laughter, the honest refusal to accept extra money. She whispered to herself, people like that still exist. Her phone buzzed. It was Chioma. How was work today? Ada smiled before answering. I met someone. Chioma immediately laughed. A handsome customer? No. A mechanic. There was silence. Then Chioma teased. A mechanic? Yes. And Ada stared out the small apartment window at the city lights. He didn't know who I was. So? He treated me with kindness anyway. Chioma's voice softened. You sound happy. Ada smiled. I think. She paused. Today was the first time in years that someone saw me as just Ada. Little did she know, while she was smiling in her tiny apartment, Richard Lawson sat inside his luxurious penthouse staring at a photograph of her. A private investigator stood nearby. We're getting closer, sir. Richard's eyes narrowed. Find her. I don't care where she's hiding. And when you do, a cold smile spread across his face. Don't let her know she's being watched. Far away, unaware that danger was already creeping toward her, Ada closed her eyes that night with something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The next morning, Ada woke before sunrise to the shrill sound of her alarm clock. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. She instinctively reached toward the bedside table, expecting to find the expensive phone that usually displayed dozens of unread emails from executives around the world. Instead, her hand touched an old plastic alarm clock she had bought from a neighborhood market. She smiled. This is my life now. The tiny apartment was quiet except for the sound of birds outside the window. She stretched her muscular arms and prepared a simple breakfast of bread, fried eggs, and tea. Back in her mansion, breakfast had been prepared by professional chefs and served on fine china. Now she washed her own dishes before leaving for work. Oddly enough, she preferred this life. Felt real. By 8 o'clock, Swift Drop Delivery Services was already buzzing with activity. Delivery riders checked addresses while dispatchers sorted parcels. Mr. Bello waved Ada over. Good morning, Rider 47. Good morning, sir. I've noticed something. Ada tilted her head. You've become one of our most reliable riders. Thank you. You've never delivered a package late. Ada smiled. I try my best. Mr. Bello handed her a stack of parcels. You've earned these premium deliveries. She accepted them with gratitude. As she glanced through the delivery addresses, one location immediately caught her attention. Ajagunal Road, only a few streets away from E's motorcycle repairs. Without realizing it, a smile spread across her face. By noon, Ada had completed nearly all her deliveries. She looked at the final package in her delivery box. The customer's address was only 3 minutes from David's workshop. She parked outside the customer's gate, handed over the package, collected the signature, and climbed back onto her motorcycle. Her shift technically wasn't over. She could return to the office immediately. Instead, she looked toward the direction of the workshop. I'm only passing by, she whispered to herself. I just want to thank him again. She started the motorcycle. 3 minutes later, she found herself parking in front of E's motorcycle repairs. David looked up from beneath the hood of a motorcycle and smiled. Well, the motorcycle survived today. Ada laughed. It did. Sophia, who had been drawing with colored pencils on a wooden bench, jumped to her feet. Ada! She ran toward her so quickly that David barely had time to warn her. Careful! Sophia wrapped her little arms around Ada. You came back. Ada hugged her warmly. I was nearby. Sophia grinned. I knew you would. David wiped engine oil from his hands with a rag. So, what brings you here? Ada hesitated for a second. I just wanted to thank you properly. David smiled. You already did. No, I don't think I did. David shrugged. Then let me thank you too. For fixing Sophia's bicycle. Ada laughed. I think we're even. Mrs. Grace emerged from the back room carrying a tray. I had a feeling we'd have another guest today. David smiled. Mama! What? I made extra meat pies this morning. She looked at Ada. You'll help us eat them. Ada politely shook her head. I don't want to disturb you. Nonsense. Mrs. Grace placed the tray on a wooden table. If you refuse, I'll think you didn't enjoy my tea yesterday. Ada laughed. I definitely enjoyed the tea. Then sit. David pulled out an old plastic chair. Ada sat down. For the next 30 minutes, they talked while sharing meat pies and hot tea. Not once did anyone ask her what she was worth. Instead, David asked, "How long have you been riding deliveries?" "Only a few weeks." "And you're already handling Lagos traffic?" "I'm learning." He chuckled. "That's impressive." "What about you?" Ada asked. "How long have you been fixing motorcycles?" David leaned back. "Almost 15 years. You must really love it." "I do." He smiled at the motorcycles around him. "I've had offers to work for bigger workshops. So why stay here?" David looked around the neighborhood. "These people are my family. If I leave, who'll repair their motorcycles honestly?" Ada quietly admired his answer. Most people chased bigger salaries. David chased purpose. As the afternoon wore on, more customers arrived. Ada noticed something unusual. Several elderly riders greeted David by name. Children waved at him while walking home from school. Even street traders smiled whenever they passed the workshop. David knew everyone. More importantly, everyone seemed to trust him. One elderly man parked his motorcycle nearby. "David, my brakes feel strange." David checked them carefully. "You shouldn't ride this." The old man sighed. "I don't have enough money today." David smiled. "Bring whatever you have next week." The man looked relieved. "God bless you." After he left, Ada couldn't hide her curiosity. What if he never comes back? David shrugged. "Then he doesn't. You'd lose money." "I'd rather lose money than watch someone get injured because they couldn't afford repairs." Ada stared at him. She had met thousands of successful businessmen. Very few thought that way. The following week, Ada accepted every delivery she could find around Ajaganal Road. Her co-workers soon began teasing her. One afternoon, a rider named Musa laughed. "Ada." She looked up. "Yes, you're becoming the queen of Ajaganal." The riders laughed. Mr. Bello looked confused. "What does that mean?" Musa grinned. "Every time there's a delivery near Ajaganal, she volunteers." Ada felt her cheeks warm. "It's just easier because I know the roads now." The others nodded suspiciously. "If you say so." Ada quickly picked up another parcel before anyone could continue teasing her. Deep inside, she knew they were right. She wasn't choosing those routes because they were easier. She was choosing them because she wanted to see David. Days became weeks. Visiting the workshop slowly became part of her routine. Sometimes she stayed for 5 minutes. Sometimes for an hour after work. She and David spoke about everything. Favorite foods, childhood memories, books, movies, dreams. Never once did he boast. Never once did he complain about life. He simply appreciated what he had. Ada found that refreshing. One evening, while helping David organize spare parts, she accidentally lifted an entire motorcycle engine onto a workbench with surprising ease. David blinked. "You're incredibly strong." Ada froze. She had forgotten herself. Thinking quickly, she laughed. "I carried heavy boxes at my previous job." David scratched his chin. "They must have been very heavy boxes." She laughed nervously. "You could say that." David smiled. "I guess I'm lucky you're on my side." Neither of them noticed Mrs. Grace smiling quietly from the doorway. Sophia adored Ada. Whenever Ada arrived, the little girl abandoned whatever she was doing. "Can we play? Can you read me a story? Will you race me?" One Saturday afternoon, Sophia challenged Ada to a race down the quiet street on bicycles. David laughed. "She won't let you win." Sophia folded her tiny arms confidently. "I'm the fastest." Ada grinned. "We'll see." The race attracted laughter from nearby neighbors. Children cheered. Adults smiled. Sophia pedaled as hard as she could. Ada deliberately rode slower. Sophia crossed the finish line first. "I won." She jumped off the bicycle and danced proudly. David laughed so hard he nearly dropped the wrench in his hand. "You let her win." Ada winked. "Don't tell her." Mrs. Grace chuckled. "Some victories are worth giving away." Ada looked at the happy little family before her. A strange feeling settled inside her chest. Peace. She hadn't realized how much she had missed ordinary happiness. That evening, after closing the workshop, David locked the gates. "You don't have to keep stopping by," he said as they walked toward Ada's motorcycle. Ada smiled. "I know, but I like coming." David looked at her for a moment. "So do we." The words lingered in her heart long after she rode away. Later that night, inside her tiny apartment, Ada joined a secure online board meeting. On the computer screen, 12 executives waited nervously. One director cleared his throat. "Good evening, Madam CEO." Ada's warm smile disappeared instantly. Her posture changed. Her voice became firm. "Let's begin." For 2 hours she analyzed financial reports, approved international contracts, and solved complex business disputes. No one on the call could imagine she was sitting in a modest apartment wearing an old t-shirt after spending the day delivering packages on a motorcycle. When the meeting ended, Chioma remained on the screen. "You look happier." Ada smiled. "I am. Because of the mechanic?" Ada laughed. "Maybe." Chioma leaned closer. "Careful. What do you mean?" "You're starting to care about him." Ada became quiet. She hadn't admitted it aloud. But she knew Chioma was right. David was slowly becoming more than just a kind stranger. Across the city, another conversation was taking place. Richard Lawson sat inside his luxurious penthouse while a private investigator spread several photographs across the table. One picture showed Ada wearing a delivery uniform. Another showed her motorcycle. Another captured her laughing with David outside the workshop. Richard's face darkened. "So, this is where you've been hiding." He stared at the photo of David. "And who exactly is he?" "A local mechanic." Richard laughed bitterly. "A mechanic? She left me." "For a mechanic?" The investigator shook his head. "We don't know the nature of their relationship." Richard picked up the photograph and clenched it tightly. "It doesn't matter." His voice turned cold. "If she thinks she can disappear from my life, she's about to discover just how wrong she is." Outside, lightning flashed across the Lagos sky. Neither Ada nor David knew that while their friendship was quietly blossoming into something beautiful, someone consumed by pride, jealousy, and greed had already begun planning to destroy it before it could ever become love. The weeks passed more quickly than Ada expected. Every morning she put on the same sky-blue delivery jacket, strapped on her helmet, and rode through the crowded streets of Lagos like every other delivery rider. She no longer felt like she was pretending. She had learned how to weave carefully through traffic, avoid flooded roads after heavy rain, and recognize customers who would greet her with a smile from those who would barely acknowledge her existence. Yet no matter how busy her schedule became, there was one place her motorcycle always seemed to find: E's motorcycle repairs. Sometimes she truly had a delivery nearby. Other times, she quietly created an excuse. One Tuesday afternoon, Ada parked her motorcycle outside the workshop carrying a small brown paper bag. David looked up from repairing a scooter. "You've come to inspect my work again?" he teased. Ada laughed. "I brought lunch." David raised an eyebrow. "Lunch?" "I passed a woman selling fresh akara and bread." She held up the bag. "I bought too much." David wiped his hands on a clean rag before smiling. "I think that's the oldest excuse in history." "What excuse?" "I accidentally bought too much food." Ada pretended to look offended. "I really did." David chuckled. "I'll believe you." Mrs. Grace stepped out from the back room just in time to hear the conversation. "If both of you are finished arguing over imaginary extra food," she said with a grin, "come inside before everything gets cold." Sophia clapped excitedly. "Picnic." "It isn't a picnic," David corrected. "It feels like one," Sophia replied. They all laughed. Lunch quickly became a tradition. Some days Ada brought roasted corn. Other days David bought jollof rice from a nearby restaurant. Sometimes Mrs. Grace cooked enough food for everyone. The conversations were simple. They discussed football, neighborhood gossip, funny customers, childhood memories. One afternoon, David asked, "If you weren't a delivery rider, what would you be?" Ada almost answered honestly, "A billionaire." Instead, she smiled. "I honestly don't know." David looked surprised. You've never dreamed about another career? I've always worked. What kind of work? A little of everything. That wasn't entirely a lie. Before building her empire, Ada had done almost every job imaginable. David nodded thoughtfully. I think you'd make a good teacher. She laughed. Really? You're patient. You explain things clearly. And children seem to trust you. Ada glanced toward Sophia, who was happily drawing flowers on a sheet of paper. Her heart warmed. I've never thought about that. A few days later, Ada arrived just as David struggled to unload a heavy motorcycle engine from a delivery truck. I've got it, she said. Before David could protest, Ada effortlessly lifted the engine with both hands and carried it into the workshop. David stared. So, Ada slowly placed it on the workbench. That happened. He blinked twice. I've been trying to lift that for 5 minutes. Ada laughed nervously. I guess all those deliveries made me stronger. David folded his arms. I've seen bodybuilders struggle with that engine. She scratched the back of her neck. I've always been unusually strong. David smiled. Well, I'm definitely calling you whenever I need help. They both laughed. From across the room, Mrs. Grace quietly watched the exchange. There was something beautiful about the way they smiled around each other. Neither of them seemed to notice it, but everyone else did. One evening, after work, Ada found David sitting outside the workshop watching the sunset. He looked unusually quiet. She parked her motorcycle and sat beside him. Everything okay? David nodded slowly. Today is my wife's birthday. Ada's smile faded. I'm sorry. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The evening breeze carried the scent of rain-soaked earth through the neighborhood. Finally, David broke the silence. Sometimes I still expect her to walk through that gate. Ada listened quietly. We were married for 8 years. He smiled sadly. She laughed at all my terrible jokes. Ada smiled. I find that hard to believe. They really were terrible. What happened? David stared toward the fading sun. A drunk driver. It happened so fast. Sophia was only 3. Ada's chest tightened. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder. I'm so sorry. David nodded. I spent a long time wondering if I'd ever be happy again. He looked toward the workshop where Sophia's laughter echoed from inside. Then I realized something. What? I couldn't stop living. She wouldn't have wanted that. Ada admired his strength. Not the physical kind. The kind that allowed someone to keep loving life after unimaginable pain. As the days passed, Ada found herself looking forward to seeing David more than anything else. She caught herself smiling whenever her phone displayed deliveries near his neighborhood. She began leaving work a little later just to spend a few extra minutes talking with him. One afternoon, Chioma called during Ada's lunch break. So, how's the secret life? Ada smiled. It's peaceful. And the mechanic? Ada laughed. You always ask about him. Because every time I call, you're smiling. Ada became quiet. I think he's different. In what way? He never asks about money. He never tries to impress me. He just... She searched for the right words. Treats me like I'm enough. Chioma smiled through the phone. Be careful. I know. No. I mean be careful with your heart. Ada looked toward David, who was helping an elderly customer start his motorcycle. I think, she whispered, it may already be too late. That Saturday, the neighborhood organized a small community cleanup. Everyone came together to clear block drainage, collect litter, and repair damaged sidewalks before the rainy season worsened. Ada volunteered without hesitation. She spent hours lifting heavy concrete blocks, clearing fallen tree branches, and helping elderly residents move broken furniture. Several neighbors watched in amazement. That delivery lady is incredibly strong. I've never seen a woman lift like that. One elderly woman smiled. Strength isn't only for men. David couldn't stop smiling. She's amazing. Mrs. Grace glanced at her son. You've been staring at her all morning. David looked embarrassed. I wasn't staring. You were admiring. Sophia giggled. Daddy likes Ada. David nearly dropped the shovel he was holding. Sophia. What? Mrs. Grace laughed. Children usually notice these things first. David quickly changed the subject. Who's ready for lunch? That afternoon, while everyone shared food beneath a large mango tree, chaos suddenly erupted. A woman screamed from across the street. Help! My bag! 2 young men on a motorcycle had snatched her handbag and sped away. The frightened woman fell to the ground while crying for help. Without thinking, Ada jumped to her feet. The robbers' motorcycle slowed slightly as they approached a muddy section of the road. Ada sprinted after them. David shouted behind her. Ada! She ignored him. The muscular billionaire inside her took over. As the motorcycle struggled through the mud, Ada caught up astonishingly fast. One of the robbers looked over his shoulder. What the? Before he could finish speaking, Ada grabbed the rear of the motorcycle. With one powerful pull, she yanked it sideways. The bike lost balance. Both robbers crashed harmlessly into the muddy roadside. Before they could stand, Ada restrained one man while kicking the stolen handbag out of reach of the other. The surrounding crowd rushed over. Several men helped hold the robbers until the police arrived minutes later. Everyone stared at Ada in disbelief. The elderly woman whose bag had been stolen burst into tears. My daughter! Thank you. She hugged Ada tightly. If you hadn't stopped them. My savings. My medicines. Ada handed the handbag back with a smile. Everything is okay now. As the crowd slowly dispersed, David walked toward Ada. His expression was a mixture of relief and amazement. Are you out of your mind? Ada blinked. What? You chased armed robbers. They could have hurt you. I couldn't just watch. David sighed deeply. You scared me. For a brief moment their eyes met. Neither spoke. Finally David smiled. I don't know anyone as brave as you. Ada felt warmth spread through her heart. Not because he admired her strength, but because he had been genuinely worried about her. That evening, news of the incident spread throughout the neighborhood. Children excitedly reenacted the chase. Shop owners praised Ada's courage. The elderly woman told everyone she met that a delivery rider had saved her life. By sunset, people affectionately began calling Ada our hero. Mrs. Grace smiled proudly. You've become part of this community. Ada looked around at the familiar faces laughing together. For the first time in many years, she felt like she belonged somewhere. After dinner, David walked Ada to her motorcycle. The neighborhood had grown quiet. Only crickets and distant traffic disturbed the peaceful evening. David hesitated. I've been meaning to tell you something. Ada removed her helmet. What is it? He took a slow breath. You've changed this place. She looked surprised. I have. Sophia laughs more. My mother smiles more. Even I. He looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. Look forward to every day because I know there's a chance you'll stop by. Ada's heartbeat quickened. She wanted to tell him the truth. She wanted to say, I'm not really a delivery rider. I'm Ada Okafor. But the words refused to come. Instead, she smiled softly. I'm glad I found this workshop. David smiled back. So am I. As Ada rode home beneath the stars, she couldn't stop replaying his words. She had disguised herself to discover whether true love existed. Now, for the first time since leaving her luxurious world behind, she realized something that both excited and frightened her. She was no longer pretending. Somewhere along the journey, without even noticing it, she had fallen in love with the kind-hearted mechanic who had offered a soaked stranger a cup of tea and refused to take a single naira more than she owed. Neither of them knew what the future held, but both hearts had quietly begun walking toward the same destination. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the thin curtains of Ada's tiny apartment, painting golden lines across the modest living room. The distant sound of motorcycle engines, street vendors announcing fresh bread, and children preparing for school drifted through the open window. Ada slowly opened her eyes. For a few peaceful seconds, she simply lay there, listening to the sounds of ordinary life. It had been nearly 2 months since she disappeared from the public eye. 2 months since she exchanged designer gowns for a delivery uniform. 2 months since she traded boardrooms for the crowded streets of Lagos. And strangely, she had never felt more alive. She stretched, smiled to herself, and glanced at the framed photograph on the small table beside her bed. It wasn't an expensive family portrait. It was a picture Sophia had drawn with crayons. In it, 4 smiling stick figures stood beneath a bright yellow sun. One was labeled Daddy, another Grandma. The smallest was Sophia. The tallest one had large muscles and was labeled Ada. Sophia had proudly handed it to her 3 days earlier. "You are family too," the little girl had said. Ada had nearly cried. No award she had ever received meant as much as that simple drawing. She carefully placed the picture back on the table before getting ready for work. At exactly 9 o'clock that morning, Rider 47 was weaving through the familiar streets of Lagos, delivering packages with her usual efficiency. She greeted security guards. She smiled at shop owners. She exchanged jokes with fellow riders. No one suspected that beneath the blue delivery jacket was one of the richest women in Africa. Her phone vibrated inside her pocket. Only 3 people possessed the encrypted number. Chioma. Ada pulled into a quiet side street before answering. "Good morning." Chioma's cheerful voice immediately turned serious. "You need to log in tonight." Ada sighed. "I thought you handled the board meeting." "I tried. But this can't wait." "What happened?" "Our competitors have submitted an aggressive bid to acquire Eastern Freight Solutions." Ada frowned. "The Kenyan company?" "Yes. If we don't respond today, we'll lose the deal." Ada leaned against her motorcycle. "I'll be online tonight." "And Ada?" "Yes. The board is asking questions." "What kind?" "They're beginning to wonder why their CEO hasn't appeared in person for nearly 2 months." Ada closed her eyes briefly. "I'll think of something." "You don't have much longer." The call ended. Ada looked up at the busy street. For a moment, the 2 worlds she had been balancing felt impossibly far apart. One world demanded billion-dollar decisions. The other worried about delivering parcels before lunch. That evening, after finishing her deliveries, Ada visited David's workshop. Sophia immediately ran into her arms. "You came. I promised I would." David smiled while tightening a motorcycle chain. "You're becoming a regular customer." "My motorcycle hasn't broken down." "I noticed." "So why are you here?" Ada laughed. "Maybe I like the company." David looked away to hide his smile. Mrs. Grace noticed. She noticed everything. During dinner, the 4 of them laughed over one of David's terrible jokes. "I tried cooking once," David announced proudly. Mrs. Grace rolled her eyes. "Once was enough." Sophia giggled. "He almost burned the kitchen." "I didn't burn it." "You nearly did." Ada laughed so hard that tears formed in her eyes. For a few wonderful hours, she completely forgot about billion-dollar acquisitions. At 10 that night, however, the laughter disappeared. Back inside her apartment, Ada locked every door and drew the curtains. She placed her old laptop on the table. Within seconds, multiple screens came alive. Executives from London, Johannesburg, Dubai, Nairobi, New York, all waiting. The moment the meeting began, the warm delivery rider disappeared. The CEO returned. "Good evening, everyone." Her voice became calm, authoritative, confident. The directors immediately straightened in their seats. One executive cleared his throat. "Good evening, Madam CEO." Ada nodded. "Let's begin." For the next 3 hours, she analyzed financial reports with astonishing speed. She negotiated shipping contracts, approved multimillion-dollar investments, identified weaknesses in international expansion plans, corrected accounting errors before anyone else noticed them. Every instruction she gave was precise. Every decision was calculated. When one executive proposed laying off hundreds of warehouse workers to increase profits, Ada immediately shook her head. "No, but it would save millions. It would destroy hundreds of families. We'll find another solution." Silence filled the meeting. Everyone knew what that meant. The discussion was over. Finally, Chioma displayed the presentation for Eastern Freight Solutions. The acquisition price is high. Ada studied the numbers, then smiled. Buy the company. Several executives looked surprised. Immediately? But our competitors. They're negotiating. We're deciding. Chioma smiled. She had worked beside Ada long enough to recognize that look. Within minutes, the acquisition was approved. Another billion-dollar company became part of AO Global Holdings. The board applauded. Ada simply closed her laptop. No celebration. No champagne. She glanced at the clock. 1:47 a.m. For hours later, she would be delivering office documents across Lagos as if nothing had happened. She laughed softly. What a strange life. The next morning, exhaustion finally caught up with her. While delivering a package, Ada accidentally yawned so widely that a customer laughed. Long night. You could say that. If you keep working like this, you'll sleep on your motorcycle. Ada smiled. I'll try not to. She didn't mention that her long night involved purchasing a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Meanwhile, inside AO Global Holdings headquarters, rumors continued spreading. Senior executives whispered in hallways. When was the last time anyone actually saw Madam CEO? Almost 2 months. Maybe she's sick. I heard she's relocating abroad. I heard she secretly got married. None of them knew the truth. Chioma walked confidently through the gossip without saying a word. Protecting Ada's secret had become part of her daily job. Across Lagos, someone else was asking questions. Richard Lawson sat inside his luxurious office, staring impatiently at the private investigator seated opposite him. Tell me something useful. The investigator slid several photographs across the desk. Richard examined them carefully. Ada laughing with Sophia. Ada helping David repair a motorcycle. Ada carrying groceries with Mrs. Grace. Richard's jaw tightened. She looks. He struggled to finish the sentence. Happy. The investigator nodded. Very. Richard clenched his fists. I've never seen her smile like that. There appears to be a close friendship with the mechanic. Friendship? Richard scoffed. That woman doesn't disappear for 2 months because of friendship. He picked up David's photograph. What do we know about him? His name is David Ease. 34. Widower. Owns a small repair shop. Raises his daughter with his mother. No criminal record. No debts. No gambling. No history of fraud. Richard frowned. So he's clean, as far as we can tell. Richard threw the photograph back onto the desk. Nobody is that perfect. That same afternoon, David and Ada walked through the neighborhood market after she finished work. Sophia skipped happily between them carrying a small basket. Can we buy oranges? David smiled. Only if you help carry them. I can. Sophia proudly lifted 2 tiny oranges while Ada quietly carried the much heavier shopping bag. David laughed. I think Ada is doing most of the work. Sophia grinned mischievously. I'm supervising. The 3 adults nearby laughed. As they reached a vegetable stall, an elderly woman smiled warmly. David. He waved. Good afternoon, Mama Beezy. The woman looked at Ada. So, when are you marrying this beautiful young woman? David nearly dropped the tomatoes. Mama! Ada burst into laughter. The elderly woman shrugged. I'm old. I say what everyone else is thinking. Several nearby traders laughed in agreement. David rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. We're just friends. Mama Beezy smiled knowingly. If you say so. As they walked away, neither David nor Ada spoke for several seconds. Finally, Sophia broke the silence. I wouldn't mind. David almost choked. Sophia. What? Ada laughed so hard she had to stop walking. That evening, while watching Sophia draw pictures outside the workshop, Mrs. Grace quietly joined Ada. May I ask you something? Of course. Mrs. Grace smiled gently. Do you love my son? Ada's heart skipped. She wasn't expecting such a direct question. She looked toward David, who was repairing another motorcycle. He smiled at a customer before wiping grease from his hands. Ada looked back at Mrs. Grace. I. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I don't know. Mrs. Grace nodded. Then let me tell you what I know. Ada listened carefully. My son smiles differently when you're here. He laughs more. He worries less. He has started living again. Mrs. Grace gently squeezed Ada's hand. I haven't seen that since my daughter-in-law died. Tears threatened to form in Ada's eyes. But, she hesitated. What if he discovers something about me that changes everything? Mrs. Grace looked puzzled. If someone truly loves your heart, she smiled warmly. The rest won't matter. Ada forced a smile. She wished that were true. But she knew the truth she was hiding wasn't small. It wasn't a secret hobby, or an embarrassing mistake. She was lying about her entire life. Every day that passed made telling David the truth more difficult. Across the city, Richard stood beside the window of his penthouse, gazing at the lights of Lagos. His phone rang. The private investigator spoke first. We've confirmed something. Richard's eyes narrowed. What? The delivery rider. It really is Ada Okafor. For several seconds, Richard said nothing. Then a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. So, you finally found her. He picked up the photograph showing Ada smiling beside David. His grip tightened until the edges bent. If she wants to play pretend. His voice turned icy. I'll make sure the game ends. Far away, Ada stood outside David's workshop, completely unaware that the peaceful world she had built was about to face its greatest threat. For the first time since disguising herself, someone from her past now knew exactly where to find her. Saturday arrived with clear blue skies, a gentle breeze, and the kind of weather that made Lagos seem almost peaceful. Ada had just finished her morning deliveries when her phone buzzed. It wasn't Chioma. It wasn't Mr. Bello. It was David. She smiled the moment she saw his name. She answered immediately. Hello. Good morning, David said warmly. I hope I'm not interrupting your work. You never interrupt my work. I'm closing the workshop early today. Ada raised an eyebrow. Really? Why? I thought. He hesitated. Maybe we could spend the afternoon somewhere other than my workshop. A smile slowly spread across Ada's face. Are you asking me out? David laughed nervously. I suppose I am. She looked around the busy street, trying to hide the excitement in her voice. I'd love to. Great. I'll pick you up at 3. You know where I live? No. You'll have to send me the address. Ada froze for a split second. She couldn't invite him to her real mansion. Instead, she quickly gave him the address of the small apartment she had been renting. I'll see you then. When the call ended, Ada stood motionless for several seconds. One of her fellow delivery riders noticed her expression. Musa laughed. You look like someone just gave you $1 million. Ada grinned. It feels like more than that. At exactly 3 o'clock, an old silver pickup truck stopped outside Ada's apartment building. David stepped out wearing dark jeans, a simple white polo shirt, and clean sneakers. Without grease-stained overalls, he looked surprisingly handsome. Ada stepped outside wearing blue jeans, white sneakers, and a light blue blouse. She wasn't dressed like a billionaire. She was simply beautiful. David stared for a moment. You look. He searched for the right words. Amazing. Ada smiled shyly. Thank you. So do you. David scratched the back of his neck. I almost wore my work clothes. I'm glad you didn't. He laughed. I wanted today to be different. Their first stop was a small beach outside the busy center of Lagos. It wasn't one of the expensive private resorts where Ada had attended business parties. It was a quiet public beach where families laughed together, children built sandcastles, and local vendors sold roasted corn and fresh coconuts. This place is beautiful, Ada said. David smiled. My wife loved coming here. The words caught him by surprise. He looked down. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Ada gently touched his arm. You never have to apologize for remembering her. David looked at her gratefully. Thank you. They walked slowly along the shoreline, allowing the waves to wash over their feet. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, the kind of silence shared by people who enjoyed simply being together. They stopped at a small wooden stall where an elderly woman sold roasted corn. David reached for his wallet. "I'll pay." Ada immediately shook her head. "No, it's my turn. You brought lunch 3 times this week. So today is my treat." Before she could argue further, David had already paid. The elderly vendor smiled knowingly. "You two make a beautiful couple." Ada and David exchanged embarrassed glances. "We're," David began. "Friends," Ada finished. The elderly woman laughed. "I've lived long enough to know the difference." She handed them their roasted corn and winked. "Enjoy your date." As they walked away, Ada couldn't stop laughing. "That's twice now." David smiled. "I think the whole city has decided for us." After eating, they rented a small wooden boat from a local fisherman. The old fisherman pointed toward the calm water. "Just don't go too far." "We won't," David promised. The boat rocked gently as they drifted away from the shore. Ada leaned back and closed her eyes. "This is peaceful." David nodded. "I come here whenever life becomes too heavy." Ada looked at him. "What weighs on you these days?" He thought for a moment. "Trying to be a good father, a good son, a good mechanic. Some days I feel like I'm failing at all 3. Ada frowned. "You really believe that?" David shrugged. "I couldn't give Sophia the life I dreamed of. I still struggle to pay bills. I can't afford private schools. I can't even take proper vacations." Ada stared at him. She wanted to tell him that she could solve every financial problem he had in less than a minute. She wanted to buy him a bigger workshop, a beautiful home, the best education for Sophia. She could do it without even noticing the money was gone. Instead, she simply asked, "Do you love your daughter?" "More than anything." "Does she know that?" "Every day." "Do you take care of your mother?" "Always." "Do you work honestly?" "I try." Ada smiled softly. "Then you're already richer than many people." David looked at her in surprise. "I've never thought about it that way." As the afternoon faded into evening, they walked along the beach once more. Children chased kites. Couples watched the sunset. Music drifted from nearby restaurants. David suddenly stopped walking. "Ada." She turned toward him. "Yes. I need to tell you something." Her heartbeat quickened. "So do I." "You first." David took a deep breath. "When you first came into my workshop, I thought you were just another customer." Ada smiled. "I was. But then you kept coming back. You became Sophia's friend. My mother's friend. My friend." He paused. "And somewhere along the way," his voice softened, "I started looking forward to every day because I hoped I'd see you." Ada's eyes filled with emotion. David continued, "When you're not around, the workshop feels empty. I catch myself looking toward the road. I keep wondering if your motorcycle will appear." He laughed quietly. "I think that's when I realized something." Ada barely whispered, "What?" David looked directly into her eyes. "I've fallen in love with you." The world around them seemed to disappear. The crashing waves, the laughter, the music. None of it mattered anymore. Only David's words remained. "I don't have much," he continued. "My workshop isn't fancy. I'll probably never become rich. But if you'll give me a chance, I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make you smile." A single tear rolled down Ada's cheek. Everything she had hoped for, everything she had prayed for, everything she had disguised herself to find, was standing right in front of her. He loved her. Not Ada Okafor, the billionaire. Not the CEO. Not the woman on magazine covers. He loved Ada, the delivery rider. Her heart overflowed with joy and guilt, because the man she loved had no idea who she really was. David's expression changed. "Did I say something wrong?" Ada quickly wiped away her tears. "No." "Then why are you crying?" She smiled through trembling lips. Because no one has ever said those words to me the way you just did. David gently took her hands. I mean every word. Ada looked down at their joined hands. She couldn't keep lying. Not anymore. David, I need to tell you something important. He smiled reassuringly. Whatever it is, it won't change how I feel. She opened her mouth. The words were right there. I'm not really a delivery rider. I'm Ada Okafor. I've been lying to you. But before she could speak, her phone vibrated inside her pocket. She glanced at the screen. Chioma calling. She rejected the call. I'm sorry. It can wait. David smiled. You were saying? Before Ada could answer, the phone rang again. Then again. David frowned. Maybe it's important. Ada sighed. Excuse me for just a minute. She walked a short distance away before answering. What is it? Chioma sounded panicked. Ada, we have a serious problem. What happened? The board has scheduled an emergency shareholders meeting. When? Tomorrow morning. Ada's face fell. They're demanding you appear in person. I can't. You may not have a choice. Several investors are threatening to withdraw unless they see you. Ada closed her eyes. I'll think of something. You don't have much time. The call ended. Ada stood staring at the ocean. Her two worlds were finally colliding. Behind her stood the man she loved, waiting, trusting her, believing every word she had told him. How much longer could she keep the truth hidden? When Ada returned, David noticed the worry in her eyes. Bad news. She forced a smile. Just work. He nodded. I understand. Neither of them realized someone else had been watching from a distance. Parked across the road was a black SUV. Inside, Richard Lawson lowered a pair of binoculars. His jaw tightened as he watched David gently place his jacket over Ada's shoulders when the evening breeze became cold. Richard's face twisted with jealousy. So, he whispered bitterly, this is the man. The private investigator sitting beside him nodded. It appears they're in love. Richard laughed coldly. No, they only think they are. He started the engine. Let's see how much love survives. When the truth comes out. As the SUV disappeared into the evening traffic, Ada and David stood together watching the sunset, completely unaware that the happiest day of their lives had quietly become the beginning of the greatest storm they would ever face. The morning after their trip to the beach, Ada stood in front of the small mirror in her apartment, staring at her reflection. She hadn't slept. David's words echoed in her mind over and over again. I've fallen in love with you. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his sincere smile, the honesty in his eyes, and the gentle way he had held her hands. For years, she had dreamed of hearing those words from someone who loved her for who she was. Now she finally had. Yet instead of feeling complete happiness, her heart was burdened with guilt. She was in love with a man who trusted her completely, and she was hiding the biggest truth of her life. Ada leaned against the sink and closed her eyes. I have to tell him, she whispered to herself. I can't keep lying. Her phone buzzed. It was Chioma. Ada answered immediately. Good morning. Chioma didn't waste time. Are you coming to headquarters today? Ada sighed. I don't have a choice anymore. The investors are already arriving. And the media? They're outside the building. Ada rubbed her forehead. I'll be there. You'll need a disguise until you're inside. Ada nodded. I know. After ending the call, she slowly removed her delivery jacket from the hook near the door. She folded it carefully and placed it on the bed. For the first time in nearly 3 months, she opened a suitcase hidden beneath her bed. Inside were designer clothes she hadn't worn since leaving her old life. She touched an elegant navy blue business suit. It suddenly felt unfamiliar, almost like it belonged to someone else. An hour later, a black SUV quietly pulled into the underground parking garage of AO Global Holdings. No reporters saw her enter. Chioma was already waiting. The moment Ada stepped out of the vehicle, employees nearby froze. Some hadn't seen their CEO in months. Good morning, Madam CEO. Welcome back, ma'am. It's good to see you again. Ada smiled politely but remained focused. Inside the executive boardroom, 20 directors rose to their feet as she entered. For a moment, no one spoke. Then applause filled the room. One elderly board member smiled warmly. "We were beginning to think you had retired." Ada laughed softly. "Not yet." The meeting lasted nearly 4 hours. She calmly answered difficult questions from investors, presented the company's latest financial results, approved new international shipping routes, negotiated partnerships with foreign investors. Within minutes, everyone in the room remembered exactly why she had become one of Africa's most respected business leaders. By the end of the meeting, confidence had returned. One investor stood. "Madam Okafor, we've missed your leadership." Ada thanked him, but even while discussing billion-dollar contracts, her thoughts drifted toward David. She had promised herself that she would tell him everything today. No more lies, no more pretending. Meanwhile, David spent the morning repairing motorcycles as usual. Sophia sat nearby doing her homework. Mrs. Grace noticed her son smiling to himself. "You've smiled at that motorcycle 3 times. David laughed. "I didn't realize. You've been thinking about Ada." He couldn't deny it. "I have." Mrs. Grace poured him a cup of tea. "So, when will you ask her to marry you?" David nearly spilled the tea. "Mama!" "What? You already told her how you feel." "Yes. And she didn't run away." David smiled. "No. So what's stopping you?" He looked toward the road. "I want to be sure." Mrs. Grace nodded. "Sometimes certainty never comes. Sometimes you simply choose." Before David could answer, Sophia pointed excitedly. "Daddy! Ada is coming." David looked up instinctively, but instead of Ada's familiar delivery motorcycle, a television mounted inside the small shop across the street caught everyone's attention. Breaking news flashed across the screen. The reporter spoke excitedly. After months away from the public eye, billionaire businesswoman Ada Okafor has finally returned to public life during today's emergency shareholders meeting. David barely looked at the television. His attention remained on the road. He was waiting for his Ada. He had no reason to connect the famous billionaire on television with the cheerful delivery rider he loved. Across the city, Richard Lawson smiled as he watched the live news coverage from his luxurious office. Everything was falling into place. He picked up his phone. "Is everyone ready?" A voice answered. "Yes, sir. The media has been contacted." "And the neighborhood gathering?" "They're setting up now." Richard's smile grew colder. "Excellent. Tonight, everyone learns the truth." That evening, the residents of David's neighborhood organized a small celebration. The elderly woman whose handbag Ada had recovered from the robbers insisted on thanking her publicly. Colorful plastic chairs filled the open space beside the workshop. Children played happily. Music drifted from large speakers. Neighbors chatted while sharing food. Ada arrived wearing her usual delivery uniform. The moment Sophia saw her, she ran across the open space. "Ada!" Ada caught the little girl in her arms and laughed. "I missed you." "I missed you too." David walked over smiling. "I thought you might not come. I wouldn't miss this." Mrs. Grace embraced Ada warmly. "You've become one of us." Those words filled Ada with both joy and sadness. She looked around at the familiar faces. These people accepted her without knowing who she really was. Tonight, she intended to change that. After dinner, David quietly led Ada away from the crowd. "I've been waiting to talk to you." Ada smiled nervously. "So have I." They stood beneath a large mango tree where the noise of the celebration faded into the background. David reached for her hand. "You seemed distracted yesterday." "I was." "Is everything all right?" Ada took a deep breath. "No. I've been hiding something from you." David looked concerned. "What is it?" Ada lowered her eyes. "My name isn't really Ada Obi." David smiled gently. "I figured that much." She looked surprised. "You did. I assumed maybe you were hiding from someone. You never seemed dishonest. You just seemed afraid." Ada felt tears filling her eyes. "I am afraid." "You don't have to be." She inhaled deeply. I'm not a delivery rider. David frowned slightly. What do you mean? I'm. Before the words could leave her lips, the sound of powerful engines echoed through the street. Everyone turned toward the entrance of the neighborhood. 5 luxury black SUVs rolled slowly into view. Children stopped playing. Music suddenly faded. Neighbors exchanged confused glances. The vehicles came to a stop beside the gathering. The doors opened one after another. Men in expensive suits stepped out first. Behind them came television reporters carrying cameras. Finally, Richard Lawson emerged from the center vehicle wearing a tailored black suit and a smug smile. Ada's heart sank. "No," she whispered. Richard walked confidently toward the gathering as though he owned it. The crowd instinctively stepped aside. David frowned. "Do you know him?" Ada couldn't answer. Richard stopped only a few feet away. His eyes locked onto Ada. "Hello, darling." The word made Ada's skin crawl. David looked confused. "What is going on?" Richard smiled broadly before turning toward the confused crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe you've all been deceived." The neighborhood fell silent. He slowly pointed at Ada. "This woman is not who she claims to be." David's expression hardened. "What are you talking about?" Richard laughed. "Oh, you don't know?" He turned toward one of the reporters. "Show them." The cameraman connected his equipment to a portable screen. Within seconds, photographs appeared. Ada stepping out of a private jet. Ada standing beside world leaders. Ada opening a new company headquarters. Magazine covers. Television interviews. Business awards. Then a giant headline filled the screen. Ada Okafor, Africa's self-made billionaire. Gasps spread through the crowd. Someone dropped a plate. Another neighbor covered her mouth in disbelief. "That's impossible. The delivery rider? Our Ada." Richard smiled cruelly. "Oh, it's very possible." He looked directly at David. "The woman you've been dating owns one of the largest business empires on the continent." The crowd turned toward Ada. No one spoke. David stared at her. His face had gone completely pale. "Ada." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Tell me he's lying." Tears rolled down Ada's cheeks. "He isn't." Silence. Painful. Heavy. Unbearable silence. David slowly stepped backward. "You." He struggled to breathe. "You're Ada Okafor?" She nodded weakly. "Yes. And all this time, you let me believe." "I wanted you to know me first," she cried. "I never meant to hurt you." Richard laughed mockingly. "Know you first." He faced the crowd dramatically. "She turned your entire neighborhood into her little social experiment. She pretended to be poor. She pretended to be ordinary. She even fooled your daughter." "No," Ada shouted. "That's not true." But the damage had already begun. Whispers spread through the crowd. "Did she pity us? Were we entertainment?" David looked at Ada with eyes filled not with anger, but heartbreak. "I trusted you." Every word pierced her heart. "I know. You looked me in the eyes every single day. I know. And you lied. I was trying to protect my heart." "What about mine?" Ada couldn't answer. David slowly removed his hand from hers. "I loved you." The sentence broke something inside her. "I still do," she whispered through tears. "But I don't even know who you are anymore." Without another word, David turned around and walked away. Sophia looked from her father to Ada in confusion. "Daddy!" He didn't stop. Mrs. Grace stood frozen, unable to process everything she had just witnessed. Ada took one step after David. "Please." He never looked back. Around them, camera flashes exploded relentlessly. Reporters shouted questions. "Miss Okafor, why did you deceive him? Was this an experiment? Are you engaged to Richard Lawson?" Richard smiled triumphantly as chaos consumed the gathering. For the first time since disguising herself, Ada realized that the greatest danger had never been losing her fortune. It was losing the one man who had loved her before he knew she had one. As David disappeared into the darkness, Ada stood motionless beneath the mango tree, surrounded by cameras, strangers, and the shattered pieces of the simple life she had come to cherish. The truth had finally come out, and it had cost her everything. The celebration that had begun with laughter ended in complete silence. Plastic chairs stood scattered across the open space as neighbors quietly packed away food without saying much. The colorful decorations fluttered in the evening breeze, but the joyful atmosphere had vanished. Ada remained beneath the mango tree long after David disappeared. Her eyes stayed fixed on the road where he had walked away. She wanted to run after him. She wanted to explain everything. She wanted to tell him that every smile, every conversation, every meal they had shared had been real. But her legs refused to move. The weight of guilt was too heavy. Nearby, television reporters continued asking questions. "Miss Okafor, did you intentionally deceive this community? Were you filming a documentary? Is your relationship with Mr. Lawson over? What do you have to say to David?" The flashing cameras only made everything worse. Ada didn't answer a single question. She simply turned around and walked toward her motorcycle. Richard stepped in front of her. "You don't have to leave with that thing anymore," he said with a smug smile. "I brought one of your cars." Ada slowly lifted her eyes to meet his. "I would rather walk." Richard's smile faded. "You've embarrassed yourself enough." Ada's voice was cold. "No, Richard." She took one step closer. "You embarrassed yourself the day you chose my money over me." Before he could respond, she walked around him, started her motorcycle, and rode away without looking back. Richard watched her disappear into the night. His smile slowly returned. "Go ahead," he muttered. "He'll never trust you again." Across town, David walked home in silence. Mrs. Grace hurried after him. "David!" He didn't stop. "David, wait!" Finally, he turned around. His eyes were red. Not from anger, from heartbreak. Mrs. Grace gently held his arm. "My son, I don't know what to think." David laughed bitterly. "I don't either." They continued walking together. After several minutes, Mrs. Grace spoke softly. "Did you love her?" David answered without hesitation. "With everything I had." "And do you believe she loved you?" David remained silent. "I don't know anymore. She lied. Every single day." Mrs. Grace sighed. "Yes. But was every smile a lie?" David looked away. "Was every meal? Every conversation? Every moment with Sophia?" He didn't answer, because deep inside, he remembered the way Ada laughed, the way she played with Sophia, the way she stayed late just to help him organize the workshop. None of those moments had felt fake. That made the pain even worse. Sophia sat quietly on her bed that night, hugging the teddy bear Ada had won for her during a neighborhood fair a few weeks earlier. She looked up at her grandmother. "Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart. Is Ada coming tomorrow?" Mrs. Grace smiled sadly. "I don't know. Did she do something bad?" Mrs. Grace hesitated. "No." "Then why was Daddy crying?" The elderly woman gently stroked Sophia's hair. "Sometimes grown-ups hurt each other without meaning to." Sophia frowned. "But Ada loves us." Mrs. Grace felt tears forming in her eyes. "I think she does." Meanwhile, Ada reached her tiny apartment and closed the door behind her. For the first time since moving there, it didn't feel like home. She slowly removed her delivery helmet and placed it on the table. Then she looked around the room. Sophia's drawing still sat beside her bed. For smiling stick figures. One family. Her vision blurred. She picked up the drawing with trembling hands. "I ruined everything," she whispered. Tears fell onto the paper. Her phone immediately began ringing. Chioma. She ignored it. It rang again and again. Finally, Ada answered. "What happened?" Chioma asked anxiously. "You've seen the news? It's everywhere." Ada closed her eyes. "I lost him." "What?" "David knows." There was silence. "And?" "He walked away." Chioma sighed deeply. "I'm so sorry." Ada sat on the edge of her bed. "I should have told him." "Yes. I kept waiting for the perfect moment. There never is one." Ada laughed weakly. "I was afraid." I know. I thought if he knew me first, he would understand. Chioma's voice softened. Maybe he still will. Ada shook her head even though Chioma couldn't see her. No. The look in his eyes. I've never seen pain like that. The next morning, headlines covered every newspaper in Nigeria. Billionaire CEO exposed after secret life as delivery rider. Mechanic discovers girlfriend is one of Africa's richest women. Love or deception? Television stations replayed the footage repeatedly. Neighbors watched in disbelief. Social media exploded with opinions. Some people praised Ada. Others condemned her. Thousands debated whether David should forgive her. Millions who had never met either of them suddenly believed they understood their story. David refused to watch any of it. Instead, he buried himself in work. He repaired motorcycles from sunrise until evening without taking a proper break. Every time his mind wandered toward Ada, he tightened another bolt, changed another tire, repaired another engine. Work was easier than thinking. A customer noticed his silence. You seem distracted today. I'm fine. You sure? David forced a smile. Just tired. The customer nodded. But everyone could tell something had changed. The cheerful mechanic who always smiled had disappeared. Later that afternoon, Ada parked her motorcycle outside the workshop. She stared at the familiar building. Her heart pounded. She almost turned around. Instead, she walked inside. David looked up. Their eyes met. For one brief second, everything around them disappeared. Then David quietly looked back at the motorcycle he was repairing. A customer? His voice was polite, cold, professional. Ada swallowed hard. I came to talk. I'm working. It'll only take a minute. David didn't stop tightening the bolt. I don't have a minute. Mrs. Grace quietly stepped outside after hearing Ada's voice. She looked at both of them. No one spoke. Finally, Ada whispered, I'm sorry. David kept working. I know. I never wanted to hurt you. I know. I only wanted someone to love me before knowing who I was. David slowly stood. For the first time since she arrived, he looked directly into her eyes. You should have trusted me enough to let me make that choice. Ada felt another wave of guilt. I was scared. So was I. She frowned. What do you mean? When my wife died, I was scared I'd never love again. When I met you, I finally believed maybe life was giving me another chance. His voice trembled. But now I don't even know which memories are real. They're all real, Ada cried. Every single one. I never pretended to care about you. I never pretended with Sophia. I never pretended with your mother. I only pretended about my job. David closed his eyes briefly. But your job, he whispered, was your life. Neither of them spoke. The silence became unbearable. Finally, David stepped back. I need time. Ada nodded slowly. I'll wait. Without another word, she walked away. Sophia watched from the doorway. Her little face filled with confusion. As Ada reached her motorcycle, Sophia ran after her. Ada! Ada turned around. The little girl hugged her tightly. Don't go. Ada knelt and hugged her back. I have to. Will you come back tomorrow? Ada looked toward David. He had turned away. She smiled sadly at Sophia. I hope so. Sophia reached into her pocket and pulled out a small friendship bracelet made from colorful beads. I made this for you. Ada accepted it with shaking hands. Thank you. It's so beautiful. You have to keep it forever. Ada nodded. I promise. As she rode away, she tied the bracelet around her wrist. It wasn't worth much, but to her, it was priceless. That evening, Richard arrived at AO Global Holdings headquarters unannounced. The receptionist tried to stop him. Sir, you don't have an appointment. I don't need one. Before she could protest again, Richard walked straight into Ada's office. Ada looked up from her desk. What are you doing here? Richard smiled confidently. I came to help. I don't need your help. Oh, I think you do. He sat down without being invited. The media loves this story. Your investors are nervous. Your reputation is damaged. Ada folded her arms. Get to the point. Richard leaned forward. Marry me. Ada stared at him in disbelief. What? We announce that our engagement is back on. The public forgets the mechanic. The shareholders calm down. Everyone wins. Ada laughed. Not because it was funny, because she couldn't believe his arrogance. You really don't understand, do you? Richard frowned. Understand what? I would rather lose every dollar I own than spend one more day with a man who only sees me as a bank account. Richard's smile disappeared. You'll regret saying that. Ada stood. No. You will. She pointed toward the office door. Leave. Richard's face hardened. This isn't over. Ada's eyes never left his. No. It isn't. Richard stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Alone again, Ada looked down at the colorful friendship bracelet on her wrist. It reminded her of the little family she had almost become part of. A family she wasn't ready to give up on. No matter how long it took, no matter how painful the journey became, she would fight for the one thing money had never been able to buy. David's trust. 3 days passed. For Ada, they felt like 3 years. Every morning she woke hoping David would call. Every afternoon she found herself staring at her phone, wondering if she should send another message. Every evening she reread the last conversation they had shared on the beach. The screen still displayed David's words. I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make you smile. A tear rolled down her cheek. She gently locked the phone and placed it on the table. No amount of wealth had ever made her feel as helpless as she did now. Across Lagos, David threw himself into work with almost frightening determination. He arrived at the workshop before sunrise and left long after dark. Customers noticed. You've been working too hard, one elderly writer said. David forced a smile. It keeps my mind busy. But nothing kept Ada out of his thoughts. Every motorcycle reminded him of the day she had pushed hers into his workshop through the rain. Every cup of tea reminded him of the afternoon his mother had welcomed her like family. Every time Sophia laughed, he remembered Ada laughing beside her. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't erase her. That afternoon, Mrs. Grace found David sitting alone outside the workshop after the last customer had left. He was staring at the old wooden bench where Ada usually sat during lunch. Mrs. Grace quietly joined him. You miss her. David didn't answer. You've looked at that empty bench every day. He sighed deeply. I hate this. What exactly do you hate? The lies. The confusion. The fact that I still. His voice broke. Love her. Mrs. Grace smiled gently. I was wondering when you'd admit that. David laughed bitterly. Does that make me foolish? No. It makes you human. She reached into the pocket of her wrapper and removed an old photograph. It showed a much younger Mrs. Grace standing beside her late husband. David smiled faintly. I haven't seen that picture in years. Mrs. Grace nodded. Do you know what your father did before we married? David frowned. No. He lied to me. David looked surprised. He told everyone he owned a transport company. But he was only a driver. David blinked. What? Mrs. Grace laughed softly. He was ashamed. He believed I would never marry a poor man. What happened? I discovered the truth 2 weeks before our wedding. David leaned forward. Weren't you angry? I was. Very angry. So why did you forgive him? Mrs. Grace looked at the photograph again. Because I realized something. What? He lied because he was afraid of losing me. She smiled sadly. Not because he wanted to use me. David became quiet. Mrs. Grace gently held his hand. My son, there are lies born from greed. And there are lies born from fear. You must decide which one Ada told. David stared at the ground. Those words echoed in his mind long after his mother walked away. Meanwhile, Ada sat inside her office at AO Global Holdings, but her attention wasn't on the financial reports covering her desk. Chioma entered carrying several folders. You've approved the expansion into Ghana. Ada nodded absent-mindedly. You also need to sign these contracts. Ada reached for the pen without even reading them. Chioma quickly stopped her. No. Ada looked confused. What? You almost signed the wrong document. Ada sighed heavily. I can't focus. I noticed. Chioma sat across from her. When was the last time you actually smiled? Ada looked toward the window overlooking Lagos. The day before Richard exposed me. Chioma nodded. I thought so. Silence filled the office. Finally, Chioma spoke again. Have you tried talking to David? I did. He asked for time. So give him time. Ada shook her head. What if time pushes him further away? What if it helps him understand? Ada smiled weakly. I wish I had your optimism. Chioma stood. I don't have optimism. I have faith. In what? In the man you fell in love with. That evening, the doorbell rang unexpectedly at David's house. Sophia raced toward the door. I'll get it. When she opened it, her face lit up. Grandma! It's Ada. David looked up from the dining table. His heartbeat immediately quickened. Ada stood nervously outside carrying a small paper bag. Mrs. Grace smiled warmly. Come in, my dear. Ada hesitated. I don't want to disturb anyone. You never disturb this family. Those words almost made Ada cry. She stepped inside. Sophia immediately hugged her. You came back. Ada hugged her tightly. I missed you. I missed you too. David remained seated. He wasn't angry. He simply didn't know what to say. Mrs. Grace looked around the room. I'll make tea. She deliberately took Sophia into the kitchen with her. Within seconds, Ada and David were alone. The silence felt endless. Finally, Ada spoke. I wasn't sure you'd let me in. David looked at the floor. I almost didn't. She nodded. I understand. Another long silence followed. Then Ada slowly placed the paper bag on the table. I brought your favorite meat pies. David glanced at the bag. You remembered. I remember everything. He finally looked into her eyes. You didn't have to. I wanted to. David leaned back in his chair. So, what do you want to say? Ada took a deep breath. The whole truth. You deserve that. David nodded. I'm listening. Ada slowly began telling him everything. How she had built her company from almost nothing. How men constantly pursued her because of her wealth. How Richard had pretended to love her while secretly planning to control her fortune. How hearing his conversation had shattered her trust. How she had disguised herself as a delivery rider because she wanted someone to know her heart before knowing her bank account. David listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. She told him about renting the tiny apartment, about learning to live like everyone else, about the joy she found in ordinary life. Then she looked directly into his eyes. The only part of my life that was fake was my identity. My feelings for you never changed. My friendship with Sophia never changed. My love for your mother never changed. My love for you, her voice trembled, was the most real thing I've ever felt. Tears filled her eyes. I know I hurt you. I know I broke your trust. If I could go back, I would tell you the truth the day we met. She lowered her head. I'm sorry. The room became silent once again. David stared at his hands. He remembered every moment they had shared. The laughter, the tea, the beach, the way she risked her life chasing robbers, the way she loved Sophia. None of it had looked fake. Finally, he spoke. Can I ask you something? Ada nodded. Anything. When you were eating instant noodles in that apartment, were you pretending? Ada smiled faintly. I really don't know how to cook. David almost laughed. When you fixed Sophia's bicycle, I genuinely wanted to help. When you chased those robbers, I didn't even think. When you cried on the beach, Ada looked directly at him. I wasn't acting. I was terrified. David slowly closed his eyes. Every answer sounded truthful. Just then, Mrs. Grace returned carrying tea. She immediately sensed that something had changed. Neither of them looked angry anymore. She quietly placed the tray on the table. I'll leave this here. As she turned to leave, David suddenly spoke. Mama. She looked back. You were right. She smiled knowingly. About what? There are different reasons people lie. Mrs. Grace nodded gently. Yes. David looked at Ada again. I still need time. Ada's face fell slightly. But hope returned to her eyes. I'm beginning to understand. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Thank you. She stood to leave. I won't pressure you. I'll wait. Before she reached the door, David quietly called her name. Ada. She turned around. Yes. He looked at the colorful friendship bracelet Sophia had made, still tied around her wrist. You kept it. Ada smiled through her tears. I promised her I would. David couldn't stop himself from smiling. She'll be happy. Across town, Richard Lawson slammed a whiskey glass onto the table inside his penthouse. The private investigator stood nearby. They met tonight. Richard's eyes narrowed. How did it go? They talked for almost 2 hours. Richard clenched his jaw. Did he forgive her? Not exactly. But what? They're talking again. Richard's face darkened. No. He stood abruptly. I didn't destroy that relationship just to watch it recover. The investigator hesitated. Sir, I don't think Miss Okafor is coming back to you. Richard laughed coldly. I don't want her love anymore. The investigator looked confused. Then what do you want? Richard walked toward the window overlooking the city. I want revenge. He slowly turned around. And I know exactly how to get it. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. When the call connected, he spoke calmly. Everything is ready. It's time to move to phase 2. He ended the call and smiled to himself. If Ada wants to protect that little family, let's see how far she's willing to go. Far away, Ada drove home with the first spark of hope she had felt since her secret had been exposed. She didn't realize that while one heart was beginning to heal, a far greater danger was quietly moving toward the people she loved most. The morning sun rose over Lagos, but for Ada, it brought little comfort. She stood on the balcony of her penthouse, a steaming cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. The city bustled below, alive with movement and endless possibilities. Yet her thoughts were fixed on only one place, David's workshop. For the first time in days, hope had begun to return. Their conversation the previous evening had not ended with forgiveness, but it had ended with understanding. David had listened. He had smiled, just a little, when he noticed the friendship bracelet Sophia had made for her. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind Ada that broken things could sometimes be repaired. Her phone vibrated. It was Chioma. Good morning, Ada answered. You sound happier, Chioma observed. Ada smiled. Maybe because I finally told him everything. And he didn't forgive me. But he didn't push me away either. Chioma laughed softly. That's progress. Ada nodded. It is. She looked toward the skyline. I think he'll forgive me one day. I believe so too. Neither woman realized that at that very moment, someone else was making plans to ensure that day never came. Inside a luxurious penthouse across the city, Richard Lawson stood before 6 men dressed in black. None of them looked like businessmen. Their faces were hard, their expressions cold. Richard placed a photograph on the table. It was a picture of Sophia laughing while riding her bicycle. This is the girl. One of the men frowned. You want us to kidnap a child? Richard's face remained emotionless. I want you to bring her to me. Another man shifted uncomfortably. We don't hurt children. You won't. You'll simply bring her here. And if someone gets in the way? Richard looked directly into the man's eyes. Do whatever you have to do. Silence filled the room. Finally, the leader of the group picked up the photograph. When? Richard smiled. This afternoon. Meanwhile, David's workshop was busier than usual. Motorcycles lined the roadside waiting for repairs. Customers chatted while drinking soft drinks beneath the shade of an old tree. Sophia sat nearby coloring in one of her favorite storybooks. Ada arrived carrying a box of pastries. She hesitated before entering. David looked up from beneath the hood of a motorcycle. Their eyes met. This time, he smiled. It was small, but genuine. Ada's heart skipped. She walked over carefully. "I brought breakfast." David wiped the grease from his hands. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." Mrs. Grace emerged from inside the house. "Ah, my favorite daughter has arrived." Ada laughed. "I brought enough for everyone." Sophia ran over excitedly. "Me too. Especially you." The little girl hugged Ada around the waist. David watched the scene quietly. The warmth between Ada and Sophia had never changed. That much was obvious. As they shared breakfast together, the atmosphere slowly became lighter. Mrs. Grace told funny stories about David's childhood. "You know," she said with a mischievous smile, "David once cried because a chicken chased him. David nearly dropped his meat pie." "Mama!" Sophia burst into laughter. "Daddy was scared of a chicken?" "It was a very angry chicken," David defended himself. Ada laughed so hard that tears formed in her eyes. "I wish I had seen that." "You never will." Mrs. Grace shook her head. "I still remember him climbing onto the roof just to escape." Everyone laughed again. For a brief moment, felt like old times. After breakfast, David walked Ada toward her motorcycle. "I've been thinking." Ada looked at him hopefully. "About us." He nodded. "I can't pretend everything is fixed." "I know. But..." He hesitated. "I'd like to start over." Ada stared at him. "What do you mean?" "No lies. No disguises. No pretending." She smiled through tears. "I'd like that." David extended his hand. "So, hello. My name is David Ease." Ada laughed before taking his hand. "My name is Ada Okafor. It's nice to officially meet you." They both laughed. It was the first carefree laugh they had shared since Richard exposed her identity. From across the street, however, someone watched through dark sunglasses. One of Richard's men quietly lowered his phone after taking several photographs. He made a call. "They're together." Richard's voice came through immediately. "Good. Proceed." Around noon, Mrs. Grace asked Sophia to buy bread from a nearby shop only a few streets away. "I can go," Sophia said happily. David looked up. "Be careful." "I will." Ada smiled. "I'll walk with her." Before they could leave, a customer arrived with a motorcycle that refused to start. David sighed. "I need your help for just a minute." Ada looked at Sophia. "Wait for me here. Okay?" "Okay." The little girl sat on a wooden bench swinging her legs. Ada joined David in examining the motorcycle. "It sounds like the battery," she said. David nodded. "I think you're right." For only 2 minutes, everyone's attention was elsewhere. It was all Richard's men needed. A white delivery van slowly rolled to the curb. The side door slid open. One man stepped out wearing what looked like a courier uniform. He smiled warmly. "Hello, little one." Sophia looked up. "Yes, I have a surprise delivery. For me. Your father asked me to bring you something." Sophia frowned. "Daddy didn't tell me." "It's a surprise." She hesitated. Mrs. Grace had always warned her never to go with strangers. "I should ask my daddy first." The man's smile faded. "I'm afraid we don't have time." Before Sophia could react, another man jumped out of the van. One hand covered her mouth. The other lifted her into the vehicle. The door slammed shut. The van sped away. A few seconds later, Ada turned around. "Sophia." The bench was empty. She frowned. "David." "Where's Sophia?" David looked around casually. "Maybe she went inside." Mrs. Grace stepped out carrying a tray. "Where's my granddaughter?" Everyone froze. David called loudly. "Sophia." No answer. His voice grew louder. "Sophia." Customers immediately began searching nearby. Neighbors looked behind houses. Children joined the search. Within minutes, panic spread through the street. Ada noticed an elderly fruit seller waving frantically. "I saw a white van." "What?" "They carried a little girl inside." David's face turned white. "What direction?" The woman pointed toward the highway. They left only moments ago. David began running. Ada grabbed his arm. You'll never catch them on foot. She pulled out her phone. Chioma. Chioma answered immediately. Ada, I need every security resource we have. What happened? They kidnapped Sophia. There was stunned silence. Then Chioma's voice became sharp and professional. I'm activating the emergency response team now. Within 10 minutes, black SUVs belonging to AO Global Security arrived at the workshop. David stared in disbelief as highly trained security personnel stepped out carrying communication equipment. The team leader approached Ada. Ma'am, we've blocked every company checkpoint. The police have also been notified. David looked at Ada. You have your own security force? She nodded. They protect company executives. Today, she looked toward the road. They're protecting family. David didn't respond. Instead, he climbed into one of the SUVs beside Ada. I don't care who finds her. I just want my daughter back. Ada looked at him firmly. We will. Hours passed. Security cameras across Lagos were checked. Traffic footage was analyzed. Police officers searched warehouses and abandoned buildings. But there was no sign of Sophia. David sat silently inside the command center at AO Global headquarters. His hands trembled. Ada walked over carrying a bottle of water. You need to drink. I can't. You have to stay strong. My little girl is out there. His voice broke. I promised I'd always protect her. Ada knelt beside him. This isn't your fault. David looked at her with tears in his eyes. If anything happens to her. He couldn't finish the sentence. Ada gently held his hand. Nothing will happen. I won't let it. Just then, a technician rushed into the room. Ma'am, we've intercepted a phone call. Everyone stood. Put it on speaker. A distorted voice filled the room. If you want the girl alive, come alone. Ada's jaw tightened. Who is this? You already know. The voice chuckled. Then another voice echoed faintly in the background. Ada. It was Sophia. She was crying. Ada, help me. The line suddenly disconnected. The room fell silent. David collapsed into a chair. Ada slowly closed her eyes. She recognized the voice behind the distortion. Richard. Every instinct inside her screamed that this was a trap. But none of that mattered anymore. She opened her eyes with a determination no one in the room had ever seen. Prepare my vehicle. The security chief looked alarmed. Ma'am, he said, come alone. That's too dangerous. Ada looked directly at him. I wasn't asking. David stood up immediately. You're not going without me. Ada turned toward him. If we both go, he'll know we didn't follow his instructions. I don't care. I do. She stepped closer. I made a promise. What promise? That I'd protect the people I love. David stared at her. For the first time since meeting her, he realized that Ada wasn't thinking like a billionaire. She wasn't thinking like a CEO. She was thinking like a woman willing to risk everything for a little girl who had called her family. Ada picked up the friendship bracelet Sophia had made, kissed it gently, and whispered, Hold on, sweetheart. I'm coming. Outside, dark clouds gathered over Lagos as thunder rumbled across the sky. The rescue mission was about to begin, and before the night was over, lives would be changed forever. Heavy rain poured over Lagos as Ada's black SUV sped through the nearly deserted highway. Windshield wipers moved furiously from side to side, barely keeping up with the storm. Inside the vehicle, Ada sat quietly, gripping the steering wheel with determination. Richard's phone call echoed in her mind. Come alone. She knew it was a trap. She also knew she had no intention of letting Sophia spend another minute in danger. Unknown to Richard, Ada had quietly instructed her head of security to monitor her location remotely. If I stop moving for more than 5 minutes, she had ordered before leaving headquarters, send everyone. The security chief had protested. Ma'am, that's too risky. Ada had smiled. So is letting a child remain in the hands of desperate men. Now there was no turning back. An hour later, Ada arrived at an abandoned shipping warehouse near the Lagos waterfront. Rusted cargo containers stood like silent giants beneath the stormy sky. Broken windows rattled as the wind howled through the empty building. She stepped out of the SUV and slowly walked toward the warehouse entrance. The large metal door creaked open. Inside, dim emergency lights flickered across the vast room. Richard stood in the middle, dressed in an expensive black suit despite the rain. Around him were 4 armed men. At the far end of the warehouse, Sophia sat tied to a chair, frightened but unharmed. The moment she saw Ada, tears streamed down her face. "Ada!" Ada smiled reassuringly. "I'm here, sweetheart." Richard clapped slowly. "I knew you would come." Ada's expression remained calm. "Let the little girl go." Richard laughed. "You still think you're in a position to give orders. What do you want?" Richard slowly walked closer. "I had everything. I had your trust. I almost had your company. I almost had your fortune. You destroyed all of it." Ada folded her arms. "No, Richard. You destroyed it yourself." His face twisted with anger. "I loved you." Ada shook her head. "No. You loved what I owned. If you had loved me, you would never have treated me like an investment." Richard's jaw tightened. "You chose a mechanic over me. I chose someone with a heart." The words struck him harder than a slap. His anger exploded. "Enough!" He turned toward one of the kidnappers. "Bring the girl." The man grabbed Sophia roughly and dragged her forward. Sophia cried out in fear. Ada immediately took 1 step forward. "Don't touch her." Richard smiled coldly. "Now you understand how powerless you really are." At that very moment, several streets away, David could no longer sit still. He stood inside AO Global Security Command Center watching Ada's GPS signal on a large screen. Every second felt like an hour. Finally, he turned toward the security chief. "How much longer?" The chief checked the monitor. 3 more minutes." David slammed his fist onto the table. "We don't have 3 minutes. We gave Miss Okafor our word." David looked him directly in the eyes. "And I gave my daughter mine." Without another word, he ran toward one of the waiting SUVs. The security chief sighed. "Everyone move." Within seconds, a convoy of security vehicles raced into the storm behind David. Back inside the warehouse, Richard held a pistol loosely in one hand. He wasn't pointing it at anyone. He simply wanted Ada to understand that he controlled the situation. "Here's what's going to happen," Richard said. "You'll transfer control of your company to me." Ada laughed. The sound surprised everyone. Richard frowned. "What's funny? You still don't understand me." "What?" "I spent months pretending to be poor. I walked away from billions just to find honest love. What makes you think I would give you my company to save myself?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "You'd rather lose everything?" Ada looked at Sophia. "I'd rather lose everything than become someone like you." Richard's patience snapped. He raised the pistol toward Ada. "Then maybe losing your life will change your mind." Before anyone could react, a frightened Sophia suddenly cried, "No!" Without thinking, Ada lunged forward. At the same instant, one of Richard's own men grabbed Richard's arm. "Boss, this wasn't the plan." The pistol fired into the ceiling. The deafening gunshot echoed through the warehouse. Everyone froze. Richard shoved the man away angrily. "I said stay out of this." The kidnapper glared at Richard. "We agreed to scare her, not kill anybody." Another man nodded. "We're done." One after another, Richard's hired men lowered their weapons. Their leader stepped forward. "We're leaving." Richard couldn't believe it. "You work for me." The man shook his head. "No, we worked for your money. But we're not hurting a child." The 4 men untied Sophia and gently pushed her toward Ada. Richard shouted furiously, "Traitors!" Sophia ran straight into Ada's arms. Ada held the trembling little girl tightly. "It's okay. I've got you." Just then, the sound of screeching tires filled the air outside. The warehouse doors burst open. David rushed inside, followed by AO Global security officers. Sophia. The little girl looked up immediately. Daddy. She broke free from Ada and ran into David's arms. David fell to his knees, hugging his daughter so tightly that tears streamed down his face. I thought I'd lost you. Sophia buried her face against his shoulder. I was so scared. I know. But you're safe now. I'll never let anyone take you again. Mrs. Grace's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes people protect the ones they love in different ways. David looked toward Ada. She stood several feet away, soaked by rain blowing through the broken windows. Even after rescuing Sophia, she hadn't thought about herself. She had only been making sure the little girl was safe. Richard tried to escape through a side door. Stop him! Ada shouted. Security officers immediately chased after him. Within seconds, they tackled him to the ground. He struggled wildly. You can't arrest me. The security chief calmly took the weapon from his hand. We just did. Police officers arrived moments later after being alerted by AO Global's emergency response team. Richard was handcuffed and read his rights. As officers led him away, he turned toward Ada one final time. This isn't over. Ada looked at him with quiet confidence. It is. You lost the moment you forgot that love can never be bought. Richard lowered his head. For the first time since Ada had known him, he had nothing left to say. Outside, the rain finally began to slow. Police cars lined the road. Ambulances checked Sophia to make sure she wasn't injured. Doctors confirmed she was frightened but perfectly healthy. Mrs. Grace arrived moments later. The elderly woman rushed toward Sophia, hugging her with tears of relief. My precious girl. I'm okay, Grandma. Mrs. Grace kissed her forehead repeatedly. Thank God. She then walked toward Ada. Without saying a word, she wrapped Ada in a long embrace. You saved my granddaughter. Ada smiled softly. I couldn't let anything happen to her. Mrs. Grace gently held Ada's face. You've already proven what kind of woman you are. David slowly approached. Neither of them spoke at first. The rain had almost stopped. The first rays of sunlight began breaking through the clouds. David looked at Ada for a long moment. I owe you an apology. Ada shook her head. You don't. I do. He took another step closer. When Richard exposed your secret, I only saw your lie. I forgot to see your heart. Ada's eyes filled with tears. David continued. Today, you had every reason to protect yourself. You could have sent someone else. You could have walked away. But instead, he looked toward Sophia. You risked your life for my daughter. Ada smiled through tears. I love her. I know. I love your mother too. I know. And... She hesitated. I still love you. David smiled. I know. For the first time in many days, he reached for her hand. This time, she didn't let go. A few weeks later, peace had finally returned. Richard faced multiple criminal charges for kidnapping, conspiracy, illegal possession of a firearm, and other offenses. His business reputation collapsed overnight. Meanwhile, AO Global Holdings announced a major community development program that funded vocational training centers, scholarships for children, and grants for small business owners across Nigeria. Ada insisted the first modern motorcycle repair training center be built in David's neighborhood. When reporters asked why she chose that location, she simply smiled. Because that's where I found the greatest treasure of my life. 6 months later, friends, family, employees, and neighbors gathered in a beautiful garden overlooking the Lagos Lagoon. White flowers decorated every pathway. Soft music filled the air. Sophia walked proudly down the aisle scattering flower petals while wearing a bright smile. She whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. I told Daddy he should marry Ada. The guests laughed warmly. David stood at the altar waiting. When Ada appeared in her elegant white wedding gown, the entire garden fell silent. She wasn't admired because she was a billionaire. She wasn't admired because she was famous. She was admired because everyone present knew the kindness, courage, and love inside her heart. David couldn't hold back his tears. You are the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Ada smiled. And you're still the mechanic who fixed more than a motorcycle. The guests chuckled softly. During their vows, David looked into Ada's eyes. You came into my life disguised as someone else. But somewhere along the journey, you showed me your true self. I promise to trust you, laugh with you, stand beside you, and love you with honesty every day of my life. Ada squeezed his hands. You taught me that the richest life isn't measured by money. It's measured by the people who choose to stay when the truth is revealed. I promise there will never be another disguise between us. I will love you with my whole heart for the rest of my life. As they exchanged rings, applause filled the garden. The minister smiled warmly. I now pronounce you husband and wife. David kissed Ada as cheers erupted all around them. Sophia clapped the loudest before running over to hug them both. Now we're really a family. David lifted Sophia into his arms while Ada wrapped one arm around them both. Photographers captured the moment. Not a billionaire, not a mechanic, not a delivery rider. Just a family built on forgiveness, courage, and genuine love. As the sun set over Lagos, Ada looked at the people surrounding her and smiled. She had spent years searching for someone who would love her without knowing her wealth. In the end, she found something even more valuable. A husband who loved her truth. A daughter who loved her heart. A family that reminded her every day that real riches are never counted in bank accounts, but in the people who stand beside you when life is at its hardest. And for the first time in her life, Ada knew she would never have to wear another disguise again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from.